On the night of June 9th to 10th, 1912, in the small railroad town of Villisca, Iowa, an ordinary private home became the scene of one of the most brutal crimes in American history. The Moore family, Josiah and his wife Sarah and their 4 children, Herman, Catherine, Boyd, and Paul, had settled into the 2-story wood frame house with the quiet rhythms of a Midwestern summer. 2 neighborhood girls, Lena and Ina Stillinger, were staying overnight as guests. At dawn on June 10th, neighbors found the front door locked and the curtains drawn. When they entered, they saw a tableau of savage violence. 8 bodies bludgeoned to death with an axe, shattered skulls and faces, blood-soaked sheets and pillows, and children crushed in their beds. The murder weapon turned out to be the Moore family axe, later found in the house. Whoever did it used the tool with terrifying efficiency and left the scene intact enough that the killings went undiscovered until morning. Josiah Moore was a respected businessman and civic figure, and the family was well known in town, which made the carnage feel impossible and obscene to Villisca's roughly 2,000 residents. News spread by telegraph and train. By noon on June 10th, newspapers from Des Moines to Chicago ran banner headlines pairing Villisca with axe murder. Local law enforcement, unprepared for a crime of this scale, sealed the house and began interviews while citizens gathered in stunned silence on Main Street. Investigators chased a handful of early leads and suspects, but the town's sense of safety was shattered, and every porch light and locked door became a symbol of fear. The facts are stark. June 10th, 1912, Villisca, Iowa. 8 victims in the Moore home. The family axe as the weapon. That brutal clarity set the stage for a tangled investigation, public hysteria, and a century of unanswered questions that would haunt investigators and the town itself. At first light on June 10th, 1912, neighbors and local policemen forced their way into the locked Moore house and found a scene of deliberate, mechanical slaughter that made even seasoned officers recoil. Curtains were drawn, lamps still burning at the bedside, and the household lay in grotesque repose. Josiah B. Moore and his wife Sarah, their children Herman, Catherine, Boyd, and Paul, and the overnight guests Lena and Ina Stillinger, 8 bodies bludgeoned in their beds, skulls crushed and faces mauled by repeated heavy blows. There was no blood trail leading out of the house, no ransacked drawers, no obvious robbery. The killer had used the Moore family axe, later confirmed as the weapon, and then closed the house behind him as if staging the scene for discovery. Villisca's handful of officers, lacking modern crime labs, sealed the rooms with rope and posted guards while neighbors looked on in stunned silence. The county coroner convened an immediate inquest. His initial findings were clinical and horrifying. Multiple blows to the head, massive cranial fractures, hemorrhaging in the brain, and evidence that some victims appeared to have been struck while still partially clothed, suggesting they were asleep or otherwise incapacitated. He recorded the cause of death as blunt force trauma from an axe and ordered the bodies held for further examination. Forensics in 1912 offered no DNA, no centralized fingerprint databases, and in Villisca, there were no dedicated homicide detectives. Investigators relied on close visual inspection, shoe prints, witness statements, and timetables. Within hours, detectives and volunteer searchers canvassed the town, checked trains, and questioned drifters, railroad hands, and traveling salesmen who had been in Montgomery County that week. Rumors multiplied into leads. Sightings of a man on the Norfolk and Western Depot platform, a mysterious boarder at a nearby farm, a transient who smoked unusual cigarettes. Each vague detail became a thread. Local suspicion ranged from itinerant vagrants to men with grudges. Townspeople whispered about property disputes, saloon fights, and personal slights that might provide motive. Investigators quickly assembled a preliminary list of persons of interest and launched interviews, but early handling was inconsistent. Evidence was poorly cataloged, and small-town pressure demanded answers. Subscribe. Maybe one more follower would have scared him off. By sundown, the list of suspects included drifters and known locals, and one name began to surface repeatedly in interviews and press dispatches: Reverend George Kelly. That focus pulled the investigation out of the chaotic first day and into concentrated scrutiny, setting the desperate, uphill pursuit that would carry the case into courts, confessions, and nationwide headlines. As news of the massacre spread beyond Montgomery County, state detectives, newspaper reporters, and curious outsiders poured into Villisca, turning the grieving town into a chaotic scene of questions and cameras. Reporters from Des Moines, Omaha, and Chicago filed lurid dispatches naming the victims, describing smashed skulls and blood-soaked pillows, and demanding swift justice. Detectives from neighboring counties arrived with clipboards and competing theories. Leads that looked promising on June 10th quickly splintered under interrogation. A man seen on the Norfolk and Western Depot platform was placed at different hours by different witnesses. Footprints in soft soil were photographed, trampled, and then contradicted by new accounts. Evidence handling was rudimentary and often chaotic by modern standards. Doors were opened and shut. Curious townspeople moved through the rooms, and items that might have fixed a timeline were shifted before anyone made comprehensive lists. The Moore family axe remained the central artifact, but witnesses noted other odd details: a shaving mug out of place, a knocked-over lamp, a scraped door frame that led to conflicting reconstructions of the intruder's route. It began to feel less like a careful investigation and more like everyone trying to fit fragments to their own story. Three broad narratives jostled for dominance in the press and at kitchen tables: a personal revenge killing aimed at Josiah Moore, a bungled robbery that turned into slaughter, or the work of a deranged wanderer who struck without motive. Each theory produced suspects. Drifters and railroad men were rounded up and questioned. Itinerant salesmen with train schedules that matched the June 9th-10th window were scrutinized. Known local troublemakers were followed. One name kept surfacing in interviews: Reverend George Kelly, a Lutheran minister whose odd behavior and circumstantial ties would later draw official scrutiny. Town factions hardened. Some demanded immediate arrests to ease panic. Others warned against scapegoating and urged careful, methodical inquiry. Newspapers sold headlines by stoking both fear and certainty, printing lurid conjecture alongside witness affidavits and photos of the crime scene. As investigators chased fragmented leads, the physical and testimonial trail grew muddier. Time, rain, and human error erased footprints and blurred alibis. The town's mood hardened into suspicion and paranoia. Neighbors watched neighbors' porch lights burned late, and families slept uneasily. That mosaic of conflicting evidence and sensational reporting changed the case's trajectory. What began as a local tragedy became a national polarized drama that would lead to arrests, courtroom battles, and decades of contested memory. The Moore murders would not yield simple answers. Instead, the story was pushed toward the crucible of trial in Act 3. The Circus Act 2 promised finally arrived. Subpoenas, handcuffs, and the slow crush of courthouse steps. 5 years after the murders, in 1917, Reverend George Kelly, an itinerant minister whose odd behavior and circumstantial ties had simmered in rumor, was arrested and brought to the Montgomery County Courthouse in Red Oak, Iowa. Newspapers packed the galleries and telegraphed lurid summaries of crushed skulls and blood-soaked sheets, turning the town's grief into a hunger for a scapegoat. Kelly's prosecution was the legal turning point everyone demanded, and no one fully trusted. It gave the nation a face to blame, but also exposed how thin the evidentiary cloth really was. Testimony shifted from confident to contradictory. Witnesses who had once pointed with certainty began to hedge on times, distances, and vague sightings on the Norfolk and Western platform. Forensics, such as it was, proved a patchwork of opinion rather than proof. Medical examiners described the blows, but there was no fingerprint match, no blood analysis, and no reliable chain of custody for the Moore family axe investigators claimed had been used. Officers had opened doors, let townspeople into rooms, and allowed photographs and shoe prints to be compromised. Defense lawyers turned those procedural gaps into reasonable doubt. At trial, the drama turned ugly. Clergy and laity traded accusations. Eyewitnesses contradicted earlier statements, and legal technicalities about admissible evidence and search procedures undercut the prosecution. Jurors struggled under the weight of horror and the lack of hard proof. Some left convinced, some unconvinced, and others simply exhausted. Kelly was tried, but the cases that followed produced no final conviction. Prosecutions collapsed, juries deadlocked, and appeals churned like fresh wounds. The courtroom theatrics did not exorcise the crime. They magnified investigative failures and made them public. Inconsistent timelines, mishandled evidence, and a police response that was more reactive than methodical. When the last gavel fell with no closure, communal certainty dissolved. Villisca residents traded indignation for suspicion. Families who had once trusted neighbors began watching porches and locking doors. The legal odyssey delivered headlines and hearings but no answers, and that absence, an official failure, glaring and bureaucratic, pushed the story toward its unavoidable climax. A brutal, unresolved tableau that would haunt American true crime imagination for a century. The legal spectacle that followed Villisca's raw horror produced theatrical momentum but delivered no real closure. Reverend George Kelly was arrested in 1917 and tried in Montgomery County and nearby courts, answering for the pulverized skulls and blood-soaked pillows discovered on June 10, 1912. Reporters packed the galleries. Witnesses replayed traumatic memories of lamps left burning and children smothered in their beds, and prosecutors pointed to circumstantial links and odd behavior. Defense attorneys tore apart timelines and exposed glaring procedural failures open doors. Evidence handled without chain of custody, compromised photographs and footprints, and insisted reasonable doubt remained. Juries, torn between the grotesque facts and the thinness of proof, deadlocked or failed to convict. Kelly was never sentenced for the massacre. That outcome was not a finding of innocence, but an absence. No confirmed perpetrator, no settled motive, and no legal exorcism of the crime. In the years that followed, investigators and amateur sleuths kept returning to the Moore house, to railroad schedules, witness statements, and the Moore family axe. But modern forensic science could not retroactively repair the botched early record. Alternate theories: an itinerant axe murderer, a personal grudge against Josiah B. Moore, or a transient who preyed on a sleeping household found persuasive advocates but remained unproven. The victims' names: Josiah, Sarah, Herman, Catherine, Boyd, Paul, Lena, and Ina, kept the horror painfully personal. Surviving relatives lived under the raw grief of unanswered questions. The courtroom drama closed without resolution, and that unresolved devastation seeded decades of cold case re-examinations, books, and pilgrimages to the house, ensuring the crime's gruesome echo persisted into the century that followed. After failed prosecutions and courtroom theatrics, the Villisca Axe Murders hardened into a cultural touchstone. June 10, 1912 became shorthand for brutal domestic slaughter and investigative failure. The gruesome tableau of Josiah and Sarah Moore, their children Herman, Catherine, Boyd, and Paul, and guests Lena and Ina Stillinger flooded newspapers, books, and documentaries, feeding a national true crime obsession that often prizes reconstruction over restraint. The case exposed the limits of early 20th century forensics and sparked debates about evidence preservation, chain of custody, and how procedural mistakes can doom a case. The Moore House at 508 East 2nd Street in Villisca, Iowa, now functions as a museum and macabre tourist attraction where visitors and historians confront the blood-stained details and the absence of answers. Amateur sleuths and cold case investigators keep returning to train schedules, coroner reports, and compromised footprints, but missing forensic threads from 1912 have resisted modern repair. Over the decades, the story gathered layers: a legal cautionary tale, a horror legend, and a study in investigative hubris. So the massacre remains both a mourned family tragedy and a warning in American criminal history. The unresolved violence still poses a question: can raw facts alone ever silence a century of haunted curiosity?